All right. So Anne Bossart became interested in gardening when she and her husband bought their first home near Montreal almost 40 years ago. Anne has been uprooted and transplanted a number of times since then and has created gardens at their homes in New Jersey, Philadelphia, Texas, and in Ottawa before settling in Parry Sound over a decade ago. Living in Philadelphia gave her the opportunity to access continuing education programs at the Longwood Gardens, where she began her transformation from a home gardener into a horticulturalist. She is certified as a master gardener, or was certified as a master gardener while living in Houston, Texas, and rounded out her horticultural education by studying at Kentville College near Ottawa. Anne is an active member of the Parry Sound and District Horticultural Society and the Georgian Bay Master Gardeners. Having the opportunity to live and garden in 4 distinct ecozones sparked Anne's interest in native plants. Seeing how they define a sense of place in our sometimes homogeneous world helped her to appreciate each of the places that she's lived. And as a garden volunteer and teacher at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Austin, Anne learned that gardening sustainability is about more than just planting with native species, and she will touch on some of those topics in her talk today. So without further ado, Anne,
thank you.
Turn it over to you.
I will start by trying to share my screen. Okay. Be patient. I'm not as Zoom familiar as Delana is, and it may take me a little while to get up to speed and stop saying and ah and twitching. But thanks so much for that introduction. I'm happy to be here today and share my knowledge. I will figure out how to turn off my video. There, I'm gone. Great. So I will get started. I will try to get started. When a person makes a decision to plant native plants, it's usually part of a bigger thing that they're thinking about. And that's gardening sustainably. And I'm going to touch a little bit on sustainability before we go dig down deep into looking at our native plants. But some of the reasons that people start to garden sustainably is to protect the ecosystem, promote biodiversity, and sustain wildlife. And so before you get started, you're going to have to know your site and you're going to have to know your plants. You just can't walk into a garden center and say, okay, where are the native plants? Because it's not that simple. What is the ultimate objective of a sustainable garden? That is having a beautiful garden that protects or restores the benefits nature provides to humans that are essential to our everyday life. And if I were giving you my long version of garden sustainability course, which I did do at Canadore a few years ago, that was 5 lectures long, we would be talking about ecosystem services. But we're going to look quickly at some slides that compare a conventional landscape to a sustainable landscape. A conventional landscape requires a lot of potable water. A sustainable landscape minimizes the use of that. The conventional landscape treats stormwater as waste and quickly removes it from the site, down onto the street and through the sewer and back to the bay. But a sustainable landscape treats all water as a resource and manages it on site. In a conventional landscape, fertilizers are needed to support healthy plant growth, mostly because they weren't supposed to be there. But in a sustainable landscape, the natural soil food web and on-site organic matter promote healthy plant growth. Soil is often compacted by equipment and overuse on a conventional landscape, but on a sustainable one, soil is a living, healthy ecosystem. Soils that are exposed to sunlight, rain, and wind are not sustainable, but they can be protected by vegetation and mulch. Garden trimmings in a conventional landscape are disposed of in the landfill, put out in one of those big brown bags. But in a sustainable landscape, The garden trimmings are composted or used as mulch. Conventional landscapes often include invasive plants that threaten the natural ecosystem, but in a sustainable landscape, vegetation is carefully selected to avoid the use of invasive species, and existing invasives are removed, and that is not easy. A conventional landscape often requires extra water, fertilizers, and pesticides, but in a sustainable landscape, plants are chosen that are adapted to the condition of the site. Conventional landscapes often have low diversity and minimal habitat for wildlife, but including plants that are both beautiful and serve as a food or refuge for wildlife makes your landscape more sustainable. And lastly, sustainability is considered in design because vegetation can be used to reduce the heating and cooling requirements of the home. Here in this photo, obviously we're talking about cooling, but in Canada, we can use vegetation to help us in the winter. So in order to get started, you have to look at your site and get to know it. And knowing your site involves looking at knowing what your light conditions are, your soil, and your topography. First, you have to start with the big picture. This is a map of North America showing all the different ecozones in the biomes in North America. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but Delana says I've lived in Parry Sound. I've also lived in Montreal and Ottawa. They're similar to here. Philadelphia is down here. It's in the same biome, but it is very different. We'll see why. And in Texas, I have lived in Austin, which is in the temperate grasslands, and Houston, which is down in the piney woods. And when you look at this map, the zone that you're in is really about how warm it gets and how much rain falls. Zooming in a little bit, looking at Ontario, I know you're not all from Ontario. I think I saw someone logged in from Alberta, but most people have an interest in this area or they wouldn't have signed up for this webinar. And this shows you a little bit more about what Ontario looks like. And being located right here in Parry Sound, we are in what's called an ecotone, and it is extremely, it's in between it's the overlapping of the boreal forest and the deciduous forest. And we have an abundance of diversity because of that. So get up on your roof and have a look around, observe the light, and be honest with yourself about how much sun you actually get. Because plants that are adapted to full sun need a minimum of 6 hours of direct sun per day. And that's what you need for a vegetable garden. This is a picture of my vegetable garden in Ottawa. We had sun from daylight till dark, and I actually could grow peppers and cantaloupes and all sorts of wonderful things. Here in Parry Sound, yeah, I get 6 hours of direct sun a day on my vegetable garden, but it's just not the same as 12. Part shade, part sun shade is 3 to 6 hours of direct sun. And if your backyard looks like this, you're looking at sun to part shade, part sun and shade. And then shade is less than 3 hours of direct sun. And it kind of looks like this. And this is Parry Sound. And this is probably what most of you are dealing with. So again, observe and be honest with yourself, because we gardeners kill a lot of plants that we desire by planting them in the wrong place. You need to know what your soil is like. And we have two things that we consider when we're analyzing our soil. One is soil texture and the other is soil structure. And soil texture is the proportion of sand, silt, and clay that you have. And the proportions of those affect your pore size. So that affects drainage, your ability, the soil's ability to hold nutrients, and also air, because your soil should actually be 50% air. And when people are talking about, oh, leguminous plants don't need good soil because they fix nitrogen and they take nitrogen from the air. The air, they're actually their roots, and it's nodes on their roots that are taking the nitrogen from the air in the pores in the soil. So at any rate, loam is the sweet spot of soil. And if you have loam, you are off to the races. One thing, you cannot change your soil texture. So there are a couple of ways to figure out what your soil texture is. And one of them, you can actually just take a lump of your soil in your hand, rub it between your fingers. If you have a lot of sand, you will feel it. And if you have a lot of clay, it will just feel like a ribbon. You'll be able to squish it out. You can also do this fun test that everybody talks about. I decided to do it a couple of days ago. Fill your jar half full of, you take a mason jar, fill it with half full of soil, add water, add some dish soap, shake it for 3 minutes, and allow it to sit for 24 hours to settle. This is the result of 48 hours. In theory, the sandy soils, the sandy particles sink quickly to the bottom, and apparently the water comes out fairly clear. Clay soil, the water remains cloudy with a thin layer on the bottom of the jar, and peaty soil is debris floating on the surface. Well, it's really hard to tell. In theory, you will see, a layer of sand, which is the biggest particle, falls to the bottom. Then the silt comes next, and then the clay is on the top. So I looked really closely, and it could be that the silt layer came to about here. And you can see that I have some particles on the top. Without ever having done that test, I could have told you that I have sandy soil with sandy, silty soil, because it dries out quickly. And when it gets super dry, I don't know if there are other people in Parry Sound or in this area with this condition, but when it gets dry, it repels water, just like peat, like the stuff that you get, the potting mix with a lot of peat in it. Your soil structure is how readily your soil particles cling together. And here you can see that ideal soil has pore spaces, but there are platelets, and so that you can hold on to nutrients, but the water can get through. Sandy soil has a lot of air, and compacted soil, and this is more likely to happen in clay soil than in sandy soil. It forms these plates, and it's hard for the water to get through. The one advantage of clay soil is that it does hold nutrient better than sandy soil does. You can't change your soil texture, but you can change your soil structure by adding organic matter. And that's sort of the mantra of all gardeners: just add organic matter. Your soil moisture depends on two things: how much rain you get and how well your soil can retain it. So obviously your sand versus clay soil makes a big difference. Interestingly, the three of the places that I have gardened have similar rainfall, but Parry Sound is cooler than Philadelphia, so the vegetation is not quite as lush. The winter is longer. But in Austin, Texas, even though they get 35 inches of rainfall a year, the soil is, it doesn't come, it all comes at the same time. So this, the soil is something they call caliche. When I first moved to Austin, I arrived in the fall, and I decided, oh, this is a good time to get to know the garden and start planting some things. And I went out with a shovel and then went to Home Depot and bought a pickaxe because the soil was so dry and so compacted. And yet once I got it organized, I was able to grow a lot of different things. So your topography is just really the lay of the land. This is a photo of my backyard. I live in Parry Sound in town and on a fairly hilly site. You already know that I have sandy soil. So you can imagine that I do suffer from droughty conditions because the water will run downhill, and that's what it looks like in the spring off the rock. And as you can imagine, it's pretty mushy at the bottom of that rock in the springtime. One of the things that I have done, and you can do, I am fortunate enough to own a tractor, and I was able to reshape the land. And what I did was I tried to create areas. The main idea is to slow the water down. If you live on a slope or your soil is sandy, you need to slow the water down. So I have built a lot of raised beds in the front yard so that the water didn't all just run straight off the street and into my basement. I created a bit of a bowl, and so the water would slow down there. And everywhere I could, I created a level area and then a slope and raised beds. Here you can see that I have a slope and then a flat spot, and then another a slope, a flat spot, and yet right down to the bottom you can see this lovely area is bordered by the railroad tracks. The good thing about this is in the wintertime we turn it into something fun, and we can sled all the way from the top of the hill down to the bottom and in the snow. So observing, you need to decide what kind of ecosystem you have. You could have a woodland ecosystem. You could have a meadow ecosystem that's mostly made up of grasses and wildflowers, or really, these are my wildflowers from Austin, Texas. And you will recognize a lot of the flowers if I were to linger a long time on this slide. But that's one of the cool things about native plants. Some of them have a really, really broad range of nativity. You might have a wetland, and it might be just a seasonal wetland, or you could be lucky enough to have a pond. Or if you have an island, some of the conditions around here really mimic an alpine condition, and the rock barrens are that. We're not going to be looking at a lot of those plants today, unfortunately, for the people who did say that they are in a rock barren. Although there are lots of places that do mimic that, and this is a photograph of the garden at Tower Hill, where some of us are volunteers here in Parry Sound, and the garden was made out of rocks piled up and soil punched in between. So there are very droughty conditions, and there are ways to adapt. If you plant the plants in the crevices, that's where the water runs to. There's another photo. So look at your property and see what's already growing. Those are your biggest hints. Here in my back forest, there wasn't a lot growing when I moved here except buckthorn and lily of the valley, but there was some jack in the pulpit and some ferns, and so I knew what I was dealing with. If you already have lots of wildflowers and milkweed, you've got a meadow. And if you live at Canada College, although a lot of you with cottages are probably dealing with exactly this. And there are spruce trees, there's sumac in the sunny spots, but you can see that there are trees that thought they could make a go of it in the water, but can't. And again, those of you who have the opportunity to get out on the bay and explore some of the islands, it's really interesting to see what's growing there, how it looks different from where it's growing on the mainland. Now, designing with native plants is easy once you have determined your style. And once you're starting to plan your garden, I'm going to show you some slides from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Texas, because one of the things they try to teach people is that your garden can look however you want it to with native plants. Everyone thinks that native plants mean a naturalistic garden, messy, blah, blah, blah. And here you can see that this is almost an English cottage garden. There it is in Austin, Texas, which is the savanna grassland. So what they did was they set up 3 identical teeny tiny backyards adjacent to one another. The first one, they show you the naturalistic garden, and this garden has actually been certified by the Wildlife Federation in the US as a habitat garden, and there is no turf. The traditional garden that people would have, that would want to have kids playing, looks like this with some turf, and these are native grasses that they use. They've developed native turf grasses down there that don't take it, and they do not water this grass. As you can see in the fall, when I visited one time in the fall, the grass turns brown, but it looks. And then if you prefer a formal garden, what you do is you set it up with bilateral symmetry, the same on each side with a path down the middle, and you're good to go. Again, this looks like it's all very pruned and bilateral, and there are native plants that mimic boxwoods. Here it is in the fall again. This is the members garden, and this is a spring photo. You can see the bluebonnets are blooming. The one thing that everything's bigger in Texas, but not the lupins. The lupins are shorter than in Ontario. So that's very cottage garden-y. And again, this is a different view from a different time of that first slide that I showed you. By using different plants and setting it up in a different way, this is a whole different look than this, which is exactly the same spot. So a few things to think about when you are planning and planting your garden are designing. The design principles are all the same. Try design with shape. Try putting different shapes together and see if they spark off one another. Some combinations will be vibrant and dynamic, and others will just not make it. Planting similar flower shapes can reinforce an idea. And you can see here in this planting, we have daisies and coneflowers and some sunflowers. They're all the same type of flower, but different colors, and that makes a planting more interesting. The repetition of shapes or colors provides a sense of calm and visual unity. These are most of the photos that I'm showing you are either from Tower Hill, which I spend a lot of time in taking photographs, in my own garden. This is at Tower Hill. If you repeat a plant, try to choose one that has a long season and doesn't look messy. So grasses are perfect for repetition. And then strategic repetition of flowers offers continuity when moving from one area of the garden to another. And I would like to claim that it was a strategic idea that put the red color from one bed to the other, but that's just Monarda, and it does its thing. But I thought it looked good once they tend to take over though and make their way to the front of the class. So some people really rue the day that they plant red bee balm, but the hummingbirds are most grateful in the summertime. Oh, and one of our panelists, Barbara, should have a look at that. This is a little tree, a Katsura tree that she planted for me from a seed. She grew this from a seed, and it's now a few years later about that tall, but look at that, Barbara. Design in layers. Try to pull one layer subtly into the other to create a more natural look rather than arranging the layers like a class photo. And as in this photo, the bee balm is at the back of the class where it belongs, but if I don't get out to my garden soon, the bee balm will all be at the front of the class, ruining the photo. Mix your plants together with different sizes, colors, and textures, and it will be an engaging site all year long. Also consider designing with fragrance and movement. Take advantage of the natural breeze patterns to allow the scents of flowers to waft towards your home or patio area, and also grasses. You must all ignore the fact that this is not a native grass in this photo, but the way they wave in the breeze and the sun shines through them are something to consider. And there are plenty of native grasses that do just that. So now you need to get to know your plants. And you should select native plants that are suited to your ecosystem or to the one you are mimicking. So get out your pens, get out your pieces of paper and your pencils, because now it's time to make your wish list. I'm going to go through a number of native plants and touch on them. If you have specific questions about specific plants, put them in the question and answer, and the other master gardeners and I will do our utmost to help you. And make a note that any of these that have 2 asterisks in front of them are available at through the fundraiser, the plant sale, and the rest of the plants that I have included are available in the trade. Please don't go out into the woods and dig them up if you see them. So we're going to start in the Woodland Garden, which is where most of you all are. These are spring flowers. I know that winter is finally over when my bloodroot starts to bloom, and it only blooms for a few days, but it is fabulous when it's blooming, and then the foliage sticks around for the rest of the season, and it's quite interesting foliage. The trout lily is it is an ephemeral, and it does disappear. I have it in my woods, and it lives quite happily with the lily of the valley that was planted by someone in the past and has taken over everything else, but they do coexist, and I haven't even tried to take out the lily of the valley. Virginia bluebells, I have tried them in Parry Sound, but without any success. But one of our panelists said that she planted some last year and they are up this year, so that's great. And of course, trilliums of all colors around here, and they are available in nurseries. Some ground covers you should consider are woodland phlox. That wild ginger there's a European ginger that is available on the market. It is evergreen and it spreads around a fair amount. Our native ginger is not evergreen. It comes up fresh every year and has that interesting little brown flower. Bunchberry is native to this area, and so is Tiarella, foam flower. It is an interesting plant, and you often find in the nurseries cultivars that are called Heucherella, which is a cross between Tiarella and Heuchera, coral bells. And they are one of the few different distinct plants that that you can cross. But Tiarella is really pretty, and it It does spread. It really is more of a ground cover than a perennial plant. Some of the others that bloom in the summertime or early and into summer are the wild blue lupin. It's available at the plant sale. False Solomon seal, wild geraniums are great, and ostrich ferns are available. Ostrich ferns can be thugs, but if you have a big space and look at the repetition of that. Now, who's a better designer, Mother Nature or me? I think Mother Nature. Some plants for your meadow garden, wild columbine. It is such a nice plant. There are lots of cultivars that are different colors and fancy, but to me, there's nothing that beats that. And one of my favorite plants that I've never had is prairie smoke, and I don't know where I can purchase it. If anybody knows where we can get it, please make a note in the Q&A or something. So it's an interesting plant. Look at it. And when it's flowering, it looks like a lamb. And when it's in seed, that's where it gets its name, Grandpa's Whiskers. They're both blue vervain and common milkweed are available at the plant sale. The common milkweed, if you're thinking about fragrance, there is nothing in the middle of summer like that. But a lot of people don't like it, but we all do. Purple coneflower is a huge butterfly magnet, especially monarchs love it. It's available everywhere. There are so many cultivars. And it's not clear whether they are beneficial or not. There are a few different varieties that do grow in this area. You can tell the difference by how pushed back the sepals are. And it is not a long-lived plant. So, this awesome planting of coneflowers that I had that attracted these monarchs by the dozen a decade ago are long gone, but I've planted others in other places. Another real magnet is the Liatris spicata, dense blazing star. It's really drought tolerant too. It has a little bulblet at the bottom. And then of course, the other Asclepias butterfly milkweed. A little aside about milkweed. Everybody knows probably in this audience, and if you don't, milkweed is the host plant for the monarchs. That it's the larval host that milkweed, the various varieties of milkweed are the only thing that monarch caterpillars can eat. And in the years that I lived in Perry Sound and Austin, Texas, and I drove back and forth, it was really interesting to watch, to look at the plants that were blooming in the different areas according to the migration of the monarch. In the spring, there's an Asclepias that's up in the spring in March when the monarchs are there laying their eggs, and they slowly make their way north, and by the time they get here and they need to lay their eggs, we have a milkweed for them. And the converse is true. I used to, as summer was wrapping up, I would see the monarchs getting ready and disappearing, and then a month or so later I would get in my own van and drive back to Texas, and when I got there, they were there, and they were feeding on similar plants down there. So that's one of the beauties of being a native plant enthusiast, not that you aren't already. Of course, moving swiftly onward, we have wild bergamot is is being offered, and there are a multitude of asters that are native and are available at the plant sale. Penstemon digitalis, foxglove beard tongue. Foxglove has been moved around from family to family. I didn't even realize that such an exotic plant was native, but it is. And Delana is offering Penstemon digitalis at the plant sale. So put that on your want list. Lance-leaf coreopsis is just another one. And it's one of those plants that is vigorous, it's pretty, it's trouble-free, but it self-seeds all over the place. So you'll always have lots to share with your friends. Grasses, of course, are part of a meadow garden, and there are a few that are for sale at the plant sale. Big blue stem is a great one and is a host. Also, there's a little blue stem. It's not for sale, but it's readily available, and it has great fall color. So moving to our shoreline. Here are a collection of plants that will grow in your shoreline garden. Blue flag iris, not to be confused with the yellow one, which is terribly invasive. Spotted Joe pieweed, a big butterfly magnet. And then there's cardinal flower, which is a beautiful, interesting plant. It really doesn't want to have its feet dry out. So I don't have a lot of success with that one. But one time, back on the subject of Mother Nature being the best designer, my husband and I were out boating on Georgian Bay, and we were north of here. We pulled into a place to anchor for the night. It was a bay that was just protected from the big water. And as we pulled in, it was late in the summer, we pulled in and there was a cove, and these two plants were in full bloom along the shoreline on this rounded cove, the cardinal flower in front and the bone set in the back. It was spectacular. Great blue lobelia is another one that likes wet. You can see it here at Tower Hill, planted with cardinal flower. And swamp milkweed, I think, is one of the in my opinion, is the prettiest milkweed. I really like it, and the seed heads are something special too. Tall meadow ruth, electrum, grows at the shore, as does Kilone, turtlehead. The pink one is more available in the trade. It is not native to Parry Sound, but luckily, Delana is selling you the white one. Now, shrubs for your native garden. I didn't know exactly how to label these because, of course, most of them need some sun. And you can see this photo of a nannyberry that was growing outside our house in Ottawa. When they get sun, they're pretty spectacular. But it's a great bird plant. And you can see it has a pretty flower, actually, that bees, that the pollinators like, and it creates a berry that the birds eat. Cornus alternifolia, the pagoda dogwood, is one of my favorites. I lived in the Philadelphia area for quite a long time, and the regular dogwood, Cornus florida, grew there. This is all we can grow here, but they're really interesting because they're called the pagoda dogwood because of their horizontal growth habit. And it's interesting, because the new growth originates from the bottom of the stem. You can see here, new growth, and then new growth, new growth, new growth. It gives it a real horizontal look, and it stands out in the landscape. The one in this picture is planted out. This is what it looks like today in my back garden, and it's pretty interesting. It's really one of my favorite plants, but they only grow where they want to grow. they'll, and I haven't had much luck transplanting them. The other thing, sumacs are a great native plant. People who don't want to have a big one, a lot of people don't like sumacs because they're big and they run and this and that, but oh, look at the berry. There is a shorter one called Rus aromatica. It also bears. The thing about sumacs, they are what we call a dioecious plant, which means that some plants have male flowers and others have female flowers. Hollies are also like that. And so you will only have the fruit on the females. You don't always, it's not in, when you're buying a holly in a garden center, they're pretty good about telling you who the girls and boys are. But with sumacs, they don't really know, and they can't really specify. So you need to buy a bunch of them. And if you get lucky, you will get these teeny tiny fuzzy red berries that I think are pretty special. Black chokeberry is another good plant that has a long season of interest. It produces berries, and it also has good fall color. Sambucus canadensis is available at the plant sale. This is a plant that blooms in the summertime. There are two similar plants. There's one right now that's blooming. That's red elder. That is not the same plant as Sambucus canadensis. And then, of course, there's ninebark. And the straight plant ninebark has green leaves, great flowers, and then when they turn into seeds, they're red. As are the cultivated varieties that have colored leaves. But it is really a pretty plant, and it's hard to get the straight up species anywhere but at the plant sale. So make sure you put that on your wish list. Meadow sweet is our native spirea. It's a pretty plant, and it's a lot more valuable than the one that we have in the garden centers. And then bush honeysuckle is not available at the plant sale, but it's readily available, and it's one of the few native plants that was actually growing in my backwoods when I moved here, along with the buckthorn. Service berries are a great native plant that are starting to bloom right now. There are a lot of different varieties. You're never sure if you have canadensis. There's canadensis, and there's levis, and there's arborea. The ones that make Saskatoon berries are a little bit shorter. Buttonbush, a good plant, and it's a real Dr. Seuss plant. You can see that the seed pods are red, but it does produce fuzzy, awesome flowers, and it's a good bee plant actually. A few others, winterberry holly. It's so desired in the landscape in Pennsylvania and areas like that. I was astounded when I started driving around the countryside in early November around here and just saw it growing at all the edges of the ponds. People down there have to pay money for those things to put in their Christmas urns, but we have them available. And then, of course, red twig dogwood is a plant that everybody needs. So when you are a couple of items of note about planning and planting your garden, if you're a newbie gardener, one thing that is really important about planting anything that you buy that's already growing in a pot, it's really important that you plant the level of the soil with the level of the soil when you're done. There's been lots and lots of discussion over the years about putting a 5-cent, $1 plant, $5 plant into a $50 hole and that sort of thing. But I don't even, when I plant my plants, I don't even worry about that much. I make my hole a little bit. And this is, it's a good idea to make sure your plant is well saturated with water when you put it in. And this is not soil on the top. This is mulch to keep it cool, the soil cool and moist. A lot of the plants that you get from the nursery are pot bound. A few years ago, we bought a lot of, we got a grant from TD Friends of the Environment at Tower Hill, and we created a wildlife habitat garden and planted a lot of plants in a short time. And there was this one nanny berry and that kept flagging. We got the plants in June, and we immediately started to have droughty conditions. This poor plant flagged and flagged. We watered it, flagged, and finally I pulled it out of the ground and saw that it was pretty root bound, and there was no way that any of the water was getting to the plants. So what I did was I took it out and I tickled the roots. I took a lot of the peat and the wood chips that the plant was growing in. And then I replanted it, and it's been fine ever since. So that's something that you have to consider. And in case you didn't know how to kill a tree, this is how it's done. Cutting off the top is not a good idea to keep it within bounds. Plant a tree where you know it has room to grow. Cutting through the roots is not a good idea. There are a lot, I won't dwell on this very, very long, but the biggest no-nos here are planting it in its burlap. The roots will emerge eventually, but here the tree is planted too deep, and that is what's really going to kill the tree before the birdhouse or leaving broken branches. Girdling your tree is a surefire way to kill it, and planting it too deep is essentially girdling it, because the trunk will rot. And the injuries that occur sort of in an up and down direction, the tree can move around, but otherwise if it's girdled all the way around, it's a goner. So now I think Delana is going to pull our panelists up so that they can share some of their seed growing tips. But when you're growing native plants from seed, what you want to do is mimic the way nature does it. And when you buy them from a store, there will be instructions. Our native plants, the seeds fall in the fall. And I guess I should join the group. These are my fellow Georgian Bay Master Gardeners who have agreed to help out and pipe up at this point. But last year, I decided, I've never been much of a seed person. I don't know why, but last year I decided to give it a try. And what I did was I harvested some liatris, some echinacea coneflowers, and some baptisia seeds in early April, because of course I don't clean up my garden in the fall. I had seeds standing that had been cold all winter, which is the way nature does it. And these are some liatris seeds that Blazing Star, Gay Feather, that did sprout, and I planted them. Why am I not going forward now? Hang on. That's interesting. Do you know what the problem is? Okay, Delana fixed it. This is what those guys look like this year. When I planted them, each of those spikes forms a little bulblet, and when you buy a plant from the garden center, it has several in it. So I planted them together, and this is what they look like now. This is what the echinacea looks like that I started last year. They overwintered and are doing fine. The baptisia, I'm not so sure, even though I was lucky enough to get it going. I'm not sure it's come back or not. These are lupins. Lupins and baptisia are both legumes, and they have similar type seeds that are round, and they're harder to get started because they need to be scarified. You need to scratch the seed coat and then you soak them. And I've never had much luck with lupins, but they like to seed into my all over in my garden, so I just transplant them. When you get them started, you can start them in little flats like this one, and then I move them up to this size. They're in my potting shed, and then eventually I move them outside to a protected spot. Once I feel like they're hardened off and they're big enough, you put them in the ground. So sometimes I move them up to this size, and sometimes I put them in the ground when they're smaller. And mighty oaks from little acorns grow. And although we are going to be mostly talking about starting wildflowers and perennials, yes, you can grow trees from seed, and you can grow shrubs from seed. And this red bud in my backyard, which is about to burst into flower, is a testament that trees can be grown from seed. And Barbara Jackson might want to tell you how she grew this particular red bud from seed. But for now, Tracy is going to pop in and talk about what they call winter sowing, which is another way to deal with the seeds, to get them the cold winter that they need if you can't just let them wait outside in your garden and harvest them from the garden like I did. So I will let Tracy talk now.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks for listening in on this. It's been pretty interesting. Thanks, Anne. I really like that slide you showed on the tree, how to kill a tree. I like that. So winter sowing. Like Anne said, I don't usually grow seeds inside. I've tried several times, but I have not been really successful at it to my liking. Probably because I haven't spent a lot of money getting grow lights, and I think you need the grow lights when you're growing seeds inside in the winter. So maybe in the future I'll buy some, but for now I have found that winter sowing I've been pretty successful at, and with very little effort, so that's to my liking. And next slide, please. So what you're doing is you're going to mimic how seeds that are dropped outside in the fall are going to spend the winter outside and come up in the spring. So it's pretty easy. All you need are some containers. So save your large water bottles. If you get distilled water, save your large juice bottles. You can save your strawberry packs that you get your strawberries in. Any kind of container like that that's see-through or semi-see-through, that you can drill a hole in the bottom and that's got an air ventilation on the top you can use. So as you can see on these large containers here, they were cut in half, not completely. I leave a spot at the back that's not cut, so it acts like a hinge, and you fill it up with soil to the cut mark, and you put your seeds in, and then what you do is you tape the cut shut, and then on that tape where I tape the cut shut, I put the date that I'm going to put them outside and what seeds are in it. And then next slide, please. And then you set them outside for the winter. So you can put them outside in December, in January, or February. I've even put them out at the start of March, and they've still been successful. They had enough cold, wintry period to get the cold they needed. If you're in a warmer climate, like a zone 6 or 7, put them out earlier, say at the beginning of January. So you just set them outside, you leave the top lid off so that they get air ventilation and they get some moisture. It acts as a little mini greenhouse. And I like to put them out in a box so that if it's a windy day, they're not going to knock over and animals aren't going to knock them over, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. And then when the warm weather arrives, they'll dry out a little more quickly. So I do add a little bit of moisture when I peek in to see if they're moist or dry. I water them a little bit manually. And then after, 3-4 weeks, you start to see little seedlings pop up. And when that happens, you can take the top off the container and watch them grow. When they do get fairly big, you're going to have to transplant them either into another container or into your garden. And you can grow any type of plant this way that drops its seed outside in the garden. So poppies, lupins, coneflowers, columbines, anything like that. It's easy peasy, and that's it.
Thank you, Tracy.
So easy.
We won't dwell on this slide. We're running out of time, and let's move to the questions and questions, and we will try to answer your questions. Shall I stop sharing my screen, Delana?
Sure. All right. We have had a couple good ones come in. I'm gonna just go back to some of the earlier ones. Early on when you were talking about the trout lily, is that the same as the dogtooth violet?
Yes, it has more than one name.
They always do, don't they?
Yes.
There's a really good question here too. So someone has a sloped area to the lake that they would like to retain the water and the soil with a plant species or combination of plants. The water runs right off onto rock and then into the lake, and the area is somewhat shaded. Do you have some specific plant suggestions? And I'll throw that to the whole group.
That's a tough one, and the answer to every gardening question always starts with "it depends," and we'd have to see exactly. But in general, what you need to do is you need to find a plant that will take the shade and grow and spreads by stolons. The red twig dogwood does spread that way, as does the bush honeysuckle. And so you'll have to try to find and giving a little pitch for the various databases around. You can find a lot of this information on databases. The Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center has a database with a lot of information on wildflower.org, as does what used to be Evergreen Can Plant. It now has a database that is helpful, but you'll want to match up your condition and find a plant that spreads that way, because it's the roots that are going to stabilize the soil and keep the water from keep the rain from running your soil into the lake. But we'd have to see the exact conditions before we could be certain how to help you.
Sure. And Tracy, did you want to comment on that too?
I was just going to add a little bit. I do have an area like that, and there are lots of natives that would be fine in that area. I've got some trilliums. I have the wild leeks. I've got some blue cohosh, and that sort of thing. So there are lots of plants for that. You just have to do a little bit of research, and you'll find what plants are going to like that area.
Yeah. Barbara?
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of the native shrubs are understory, so they'll take the shade, and they will also. I was just thinking about buttonbush. I found one in the shade in my garden that's near the water, and it would do the same thing. They would hold the soil better.
That's a good one. I love
as long as the
buttonbush.
water doesn't rise up and wash them out like it did last winter.
Yeah. A great question from Carol that I think everyone is interested in. Is there a list of which of the native plants are deer resistant?
None.
There are none. The list is very short. The deer and but a lot of the native plants are adapted to deer browse and will grow anyways. One thing that I didn't know is that dogwood is high in calcium, and the deer will especially browse dogwood when they're lactating, when they're trying to produce milk for their young. So yeah, good luck with that. You just need to plant enough that everybody's fed.
Tracy?
Unless anybody else would like to jump in and give us their list of things that the deer don't touch.
Ferns.
Oh, yeah.
They won't touch ferns. Why, I don't know.
That's a good
I
one.
haven't had them eat 9-bark either. I don't know whether they.
I think sometimes too, it just depends on what else is around and maybe a little bit seasonally, but if there's something more delicious, like a vegetable garden, then they will leave other things alone. Another question about pests, and I share this as well. Whenever I grow lupins, I get aphids, though I never get them otherwise. Does anyone know what that's about? I have the exact same problem.
They do. They just do.
They just like
Oh, I
them.
got it. Yeah. Usually if you don't want them to go to seed, if you cut them back after they've bloomed, then that takes care of that problem. But then they don't go to seeds. So you lose the seeds.
Pam has a pagoda dogwood that's several years old. Each year, some of the main stems die off and suckers become the new dominant stem. What causes this? Is there anything that she can do to help?
I don't know. I have found that I have planted some that just up and die after a while, and then they seed in other places. That is a mystery to me. And as long as you have suckers that are carrying on, you just have to be thankful that you have it when you have it. I think. I do know that pagoda dogwood, Cornus alternifolia, does cross with some of the other native dogwoods around, and so it could be that what you think is a pure dogwood isn't. I don't know. Sorry. Sometimes you have to just say, I don't know. Anybody else know?
No, the only thing I noticed about them is that they are definitely an understory. So they want some protection. So maybe it's a matter of winter kill. Who knows?
Fran, and you are muted. Sorry, Fran, we can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself. Oh, nope. You're still muted. You want to try clicking it again?
There, how's that? Okay. Yeah, I've tried pagoda dogwood in several places, and they're really finicky, and they grow on the street at the end of my driveway beautifully. So, and I get the suckers too, and I get a lot of winter kill in my yard, but I don't see it on the street. And I think they're an understory, but they still need sun.
Sun.
Because the ones that are doing well on the road are facing south.
So question, Anne, you showed that slide of those very pretty non-native purple grasses. Someone's like to know what they were.
That's miscanthus. And it is considered an invasive plant in southern Ontario, and anywhere that you're in a Carolinian zone, it is an invasive. Here in Parry Sound, and I've observed the miscanthus. I don't have enough sun here on my property, but we have grown it at Tower Hill, and that photo was from Tower Hill. They don't seem to be a problem, and we know what a problem is because the woods of Tower Hill are filled with periwinkle. But it could be that because it's what's called a warm season grass, it It doesn't bloom until some years they don't bloom at all. Winter comes before they've bloomed. But
Okay.
yeah, it's a miscanthus. It's a maidenhair grass.
And I think this question is more for Tracy, and the winter sowing that you showed us. Do you put them out in January or March?
Sometimes I put them in January, sometimes I forget. And then all of a sudden I think, oh my gosh, winter's getting on and I haven't done it. And I put them together quickly and put them outside. I have put them out as late as early March and they were still fine. But then I'm in a cold region. So if you're down somewhere in Southern Ontario or somewhere where you're zone 6 or 7, you need to put them out, say, earlier so they get that cold period before it warms up.
Okay.
But as soon as they're frozen, they're frozen.
Yeah. Nicole's asked where she can get 3 species: pagoda dogwood, red osier dogwood, and the native serviceberry. I do know that the red osier dogwood is for sale in our fundraiser, but if someone else would like to speak to the pagoda dogwood and the serviceberry.
Well, you can get those at any garden center. If you walk in and they don't have them, they can get them for you. The big plant wholesalers, the two Conans carry both. And when it comes to the serviceberry, the Amelanchier, you will have to decide on your own which one of the varieties you want, whether you want Canadensis or Levis or Arborea. And they also have cultivated varieties that are available. So you'll have to just talk to the person who orders the plants at the garden center, but they are widely available in the trade here in Parry Sound. Little Gardens has a lot of good plants, and they will get you any plant you want.
So our next question from Brenda: are the stone crops and sedums suitable for growing in rock crevices?
Yes.
See lots of nods. Yes. Okay.
They're not all native, but there's the the Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. If you're using them to protect your soil and your ecosystem and keep other things out of the water, why not? I don't know. We're not the 5 of us sitting here today, or however many there are of us, have a pretty healthy attitude towards the whole situation. We're not only going to grow what is native within 15 kilometers of where we're sitting, because that's just not realistic.
Tracy?
The only thing I found is along the shorelines, particularly on the lake I live on, it's called a stringy sedum. And I've never seen it sold in the stores, but it is all over my rock. And it is a little bit prolific, but it does lift easily and you can control it that way, but it does spread quite aggressively. And I looked it up and its common name was stringy sedum. It's almost like a string of pearls, that type of house plant, but this one is hardy outside.
Okay, so there's a question too, going back to the soil test. This question came in early on from Helen. And did you say that you had put some dish soap in the water with that? She is just wondering, dish soap is more of a detergent and now a soap, and she's wondering if it would work better with like a more pure soap. Not sure if you experimented with the different ones.
No, I didn't, because I did use the term incorrectly, even though my actual education was in chemistry. Yeah, I would, if you were really wanted to, that would be a good idea. When you look up, everybody tells you just use a teaspoon of dish detergent or soap, dish soap, but it's detergent and soap are different and they have different surfactants. And so finding soap would be interesting to see if the water does clear up. So good catch. What was her name? Helen?
Yeah.
Good catch, Helen.
There's
Try both.
Yeah, it'd be neat to see the difference. There's a question about boring beetles. Are boring beetles only found in one species of tree? I can give the answer to that. It's no. There's probably not a tree species out there that doesn't have some kind of beetle chewing on it. So if you have a picture or more specific information about that beetle, you can share that with us and we might be able to provide a better answer. Yep, Barbara?
Yeah, I don't know what they're talking about, but I have a real problem with the apple borer, and I have lost, I won't even say how many apple trees and hawthorns to the boring. If you have a tree that is an apple in the apple family, in the rose family, you should protect the stem, the trunk, because there are borers, and I have met them from sitting on my deck and think, oh, you look a little familiar. So they all get it. And I think Anne has one that has terminal holes in it now. So they're there. They'll go after, if that's the kind of problem you're having. There's lots of beetles that are good beetles too. So.
Yeah, that's a good point to make, that there are the good beetles out there. On the topic of bad beetles, though, and a question from Nicole: something ate the leaves off my high bush cranberry that she bought last year. Any idea what and how to treat? I have a guess, but
I know what it is.
Yeah.
It's the viburnum beetle, and they love high bush cranberries. And you can do various things. You can, in the spring, you can go out and you can find the eggs of the viburnum beetle, or what you can do is just cut back everything that you see, and that'll get rid of a lot of them. The best thing to do is to plant something else, because if they like it, they'll eat it, and they'll eventually kill it.
Do they look similar to a Japanese beetle?
No, they're tiny.
Okay, I think we had Japanese beetles chewing on
Yes,
our high bush
we
cranberry
did.
too. Yeah.
The viburnum leaf beetle, it, as Barbara says, you just cut back everything, but they lay their eggs in this year's growth. So and you can see the scar of where the beetle lays her eggs if you look at the new growth in the fall. If you cut that off, get rid of it, don't just throw it in your compost heap, but you can go through and cut back all of this year's growth. And sometimes you'll get lucky. And also too, you can pick them up, you can squish them by hand when they're worms, when they're at the caterpillar stage. I have been known to do that, because I can't follow Barbara's advice of just don't plant it. Hope springs eternal.
Some are worse than others. Yeah, there's some viburnums that are really quite bad, and some that are quite resistant.
Yes, Tracy?
You can also try a dormant spray in the early spring too. That might help if you really want to save your plant. You have to spray it before the buds pop out. So there's kind of a narrow window when the days get warm enough that you can spray, and the nights have to be, I think, above 0, but before the buds pop out. So there's maybe a week or 2 in there where your window of opportunity to spray that dormant spray, but it might help you.
Nice. So just a recognition too, we are getting down to our few last minutes, and I know some people have had to leave already. I thank you to the people that have been able to stick with us the whole time. This is also the final kind of shout out for questions. If you've got them, please throw them in there now. Monica mentioned when we were talking about the deer, she suggested lantana, and I think that's a big family though. I'm not sure how many of those would be native, or if anyone knows that. Lantana.
They're not, lantana's not native to here.
Not native? Okay.
That it is native to southern United States. It's an annual, but generally speaking, if it's fuzzy and fragrant, they'll leave it alone. But the thing is, most of those things that are fuzzy and fragrant are from the Mediterranean type climate, droughty, so they're not as native to here. One thing that salvia, they won't eat salvia, and there are some sages that are native to North America that will grow in Parry Sound in your meadow garden. They won't eat those, but generally speaking, smelly, aromatic foliage, gray fuzziness, they will pass those up, especially if there are hostas nearby or something yummier.
We have 4 more questions. Heather, another specific site related question. East facing slope by the garage full of native meadow wildflowers. 18 species were counted last year. Should she put some mulch down? She's trying to limit the spread of the raspberries and mint that are there. Great question.
Well, raspberries and mint both spread by stolons, so putting mulch won't stop them because they spread underground. Putting down mulch stops things that seed from spreading, but yeah, those you'll have to pull out, and good luck with the mint.
Brenda has asked any other suggestions for native species for rock crevices.
Bearberry.
Yeah, I don't know if we mentioned columbine as well. Bearberry is a good one too.
Yeah, bearberry is good. And blueberries as well. The low bush blueberry. If you wander around, between here and Sudbury, where you see the blueberries everywhere. And the thing is, you plant the things, and junipers too will grow in the rock crevices, but they're not so pretty.
Kathy's asked, where can I find wild daylilies, the big ones with the orange flowers?
In my garbage.
My garden.
Yes, ask a friend, because
Yeah, ask an enemy.
The plant biases are starting to come out. I love that.
yeah, well, it is listed as an invasive in
Yeah.
Southern Ontario. So and there's lots and lots of discussion on the Master Gardener Facebook page about that, but it does, it holds the soil, it holds a bank, it will.
A question from Kathy. How do you treat powdery mildew on a 9-bark? I'm guessing it was some other kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
It's the dark leafed ones that get powdery mildew.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
it's hard. I've had 9-bark die from that.
You can get a sulfur type spray for it at the garden center. That
I've
might,
tried this. Yeah,
yeah,
sulfur will work.
try that.
And it's important to clean up all your leaves religiously. Yeah.
So a couple of last questions have come in. What do you recommend planting on septic beds? This is a question that the Biosphere gets all the time. I have some thoughts, and I'm curious what yours are.
I was going to say, go for it, because I don't have a septic. It's I think that you just really have to plant things that don't have a deep root that will invade the tiles or the pipes that are that you require to. But Barbara Jackson has a septic. Maybe she has an idea. Everybody else actually here except me has one.
Yeah, I've given up. I just plant clover.
Oh.
Yeah, and the moles dig it up, and
Yeah.
the monks dig it up, and the
No,
dogs.
I
dig
have
it
a
up.
septic field, and every 3 years when the guys come to clean it out, they get very upset with me. But all I've got on it is perennials, no shrubs.
Good.
Yep.
Yeah, and clover is the Biosphere's recommendation as well.
Mhm.
A lot of this stuff, especially what's in our plant fundraiser, and a lot of native species, the roots are just going to be too aggressive. That's the nature of perennials. So clover is sort of the next best option. And it is a really good pollinator plant too. Kim is asking, how do you get rid of lily of the valley when it's taken over?
Move.
Yeah.
Good.
digging,
dig
just
again,
keep
and then it'll
digging.
come back and dig it, and it'll come back and dig it, and it'll come back, and dig it.
I've tried, yeah.
Sorry,
That's it.
generally speaking, the best way to get rid of a plant is to starve it. And when you're getting rid of Phragmites and knotweed and that sort of thing, you cut them and cut them and cut them. And it might help to just mow it and mow it and mow it. I have some areas that I want a path, and I mow it and compact it, but it comes back every year. Yeah.
You can cover it with plastic, black plastic, and just let it for a couple of years, leave it alone. But I think it still hangs in.
And what looks like might be our last question from Kathy is any suggestions for lawn and grass seed? We are getting a little bit away from the native species here, but I know that there are some nice blends, and maybe someone would like to speak to those that do try to have the clover and some native grasses in them. Does anyone have a recommendation?
This sounds like a pitch, but there is a grass called eco grass that's sold by Wildflower Farm in Coldwater. And it was developed by Miriam Goldberger, and she told me that she developed it by just observing what things were growing on their own in cottage country. And the seed is quite expensive. And I have one little section of my front lawn that I seeded when I decided to take out a bed, and I seeded it with the Ecolon that about, I don't know, 10 years ago. And really and truly, that is the only, it takes a long time to establish, but it's the only section of my front lawn that isn't filled with dandelions and April violets. It's crazy. When I look at it, I think, and why didn't I not spend the money and do the whole lawn? I'm not a lawn enthusiast, so I didn't really care. But it's mostly fescues, and it's good. But also at a lot of the garden centers will sell you a mix that has clovers and other things, and that's generally what I use.
Yeah, we bought a bag last year. I should say my husband did. I have no part to do with the lawn, but it was from Home Hardware, and it said specifically like made for Muskoka brands. And I don't remember the species, but there was a bunch of different grasses and clovers in it made for Muskoka. So it seemed like a good option. We've had one last late question come in too that I just want to get to. How can we destroy burr plants and poison ivy? Asking from new cottage owners in the area. Any thoughts on? I actually don't recommend getting rid of poison ivy, and it's unfortunate, but it is a native plant. You can have one of my deer that live in my backyard. They eat it. And any other thoughts?
Yeah, the burrs you have to dig out, and the poison ivy, it's a good native plant, and the birds eat the berries, so it's going to spread. But I know that my daughter works for an organization that has a camp, and they have children that play in the woods, and they spray it. They not here in Parry Sound, but down in the York region, because yeah, it's brutal. If I managed to get poison ivy from dormant plants when I was trying to help her with her Phragmites. So good luck.
I would suspect in a really bad area, like sometimes it does get quite aggressive for a native plant. You can also probably tarp it, and if you had some like thick plastic to cover it with. I like to use the tarp, the boats when you winterize them in the spring when you rip that stuff off. That's really good heavy plastic to use.
You might want, I don't know if it's in the wooded area or if it's on a pathway. If it's on a pathway that someone might brush up against, including your dog, because they can pass it on to you if they touch it. If it's on a pathway, maybe you want to get rid of it. But if it's off the pathway and no one's really going to come in contact with it, maybe you just want to mark it somehow so that people are aware where it is, and then you can leave it there because it is a native.
Yeah, it's a great idea, Tracy. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Put yellow
Um,
around it or something.
Yeah. So there's no further questions, and we're only 2 minutes over our time, so that's excellent.
Yay.
So I just want to say thank you so much to the Master Gardeners who joined us for the panel, and to Anne for the presentation. It always amazes me. I feel like I've done this for years now, and I know some things, and then, nope, there's still lots to learn all the time. So constantly. So thanks everyone too for joining us today and taking some time to learn about the plants. I will be sending an email tomorrow. The recording of today's session is going to go on YouTube, so I'll be sending that link out, as well as some links to other resources that we've talked about, and of course, information about the Biosphere's native plant fundraiser that's ongoing right now. So thanks again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Take care.